Okay, session 56, folks. We're skipping through the do here, entitled Coronation of the King. It's about the triumphal entry, of course, but we're choosing to call it the Coronation of the King. And moving into chapter 11 of Mark, the first 8 verses. So we're finally going to examine the triumphal entry, or as we've called it, the coronation of the King. Remember, the triumphal entry is of Jesus, the Messiah, and the Messiah is to be king. So we're calling this the coronation of the King. No question again about Jesus' Messiahship. It will be front and center as we go down the slope of Olivet toward Jerusalem. Now, do you know that all 4 Gospels describe this event? Not just the synoptics. John also gets in here. Only one other event prior to this time had been covered by all 4 Gospels. Which one was it? Some of you, I'm sure, know. Should I answer it or should I just go on? Well, I think I'll take a drink of my Pepsi, which I have with me again, and we'll see. Sorry, Coke lovers. Well, if you go to Luke 19:11 and begin reading, you will find that just before, at least I think it's just immediately before the descent began, Jesus told the 12 the parable of the 10 minas, because they still believed he was going to Jerusalem to claim his kingship and bring the kingdom of God into physical existence at that time. Jesus goes into this event as they go down the descent towards Jerusalem, allowing his messiahship to be openly known and spoken about. He was going in as the king promised in the Old Testament, the one who would sit on David's throne forever. But first, they needed some setup. Every event needs setup, right? Verse 1 of Mark 11, and as they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage, remember I had trouble saying that last time, and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives. Bethany is to the, I guess it'd be south of Bethphage, but anyhow, if you're thinking of Jerusalem, then up the slope, Bethphage, up the slope a little further, Bethany. So Bethany was first, Bethphage was between Bethany and Jerusalem, I think within a mile of it, maybe even less. Near the Mount of Olives, which is where the path was that was going down into Jerusalem. So that's where we are. Jesus sent 2 of his disciples. There are several points to be mentioned in passing as Jesus and the 12 moved toward the final destination of Jerusalem. Bethphage, which means house of unripe figs, was, I believe, at the point of descent into Jerusalem, where the path really starts to drop. And it began particularly as one's pilgrim journey moved beyond Jericho. Bethany, which just means, I think, house of figs, not unripe figs, which was the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, was close by Bethphage, and it was on Bethphage was on the Jerusalem side of Bethany. The Mount of Olives was a high point just east of Jerusalem, across the Kidron Valley, and holding a path of descent from Jericho into Jerusalem. It was east of the temple, across the Kidron Valley, and at the bottom was the Garden of Gethsemane. The mount offered the best look into the temple area itself. Let's see what Jesus sent the two to be, or to do. By the way, because of Mark's detail on this event, many believe he is writing from Peter's eyewitness account. And if that's true, there's a good chance that Peter was one of the two sent. And since he was usually up front, that wouldn't surprise us. Well, let's go to verse 2 and 3. And Jesus said to them, go into the village opposite you. So they evidently have just left Bethany. I suppose they could still have been at Bethany. And Jesus saying, look out across the way. That village is Bethphage. And immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there. So he's sending people to go in, two people to go into this town or this village. And the minute they get inside, they'll find a colt tied up. And this is to be the colt of a donkey, on which no one yet has ever sat. And that there is some reason why it's never been set on. And untie it and bring it here. So you go find a donkey colt tied up, you untie it and bring it here. By the way, verse 3, and if anyone says to you, why are you doing this? You say, the Lord has need of it. And immediately he'll send it back here when he's finished. Okay, so if Jesus and the 12 were on the road about to descend to Jerusalem, the opposite you probably meant that this was Bethphage. And it was just off the road a bit, apparently. So how are we sure the village was Bethphage? Matthew 21:1. Matthew says this, and when they had approached Jerusalem and had come to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent his two disciples. So Matthew says this apparently was Bethphage. It was at the point of descent along the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. Jesus' effort here is quite purposeful, something we'll discuss further in a bit. What does the word immediately imply? He says you go to the village and immediately you will find a colt. Well, tells me that the colt would likely be tied near the entrance to the village. So, what were Jesus' orders? Find the colt, untie the colt, bring the colt to me. And I guess answer any questions if they happen to come. A colt could mean the young of any mammal, but in this case it refers specifically to the foal of a donkey. Matthew tells us that in 21:2. Jesus saying to them, the two sent, go into the village opposite you. Immediately you will find a donkey tied there, and a colt with her. So Matthew says, now we got the mother and the colt. Untie them, both donkey and colt, and bring them to me, the donkey and the colt. Now, Mark doesn't talk about the donkey. because Jesus doesn't ride the donkey. But if you've ever messed with young animals, if you want to keep the young one under good behavior, take Mama with you. I don't know if that's why it happened that way, but it seems reasonable to me. Matthew tells us that it was the foal of a donkey, and he tells us that the two were instructed to bring the mare and the colt both. Do you call the donkey mother mare? You do in horses. I don't know. Not sure about donkeys. Can you give a good argument as to why Matthew and Mark are not contradictory or one in error? Again, Matthew says they're going to take mama and kid. Mark just says he bring the kid. He doesn't say, Mark does not say they bring only the young colt. So he's not in error. He just focuses on the one that Jesus is to ride. Mama was of no concern to Mark. But why must the colt never have carried a rider? What's that about? Well, in that day and time, an animal that had never been used or ridden on would be considered especially appropriate for use in a holy task. For example, read from 1 Samuel 6:7. This individual said, "Now therefore take and prepare a new cart," an unused cart, 2 milk cows on which there has never been a yoke, and hitch the cows to the cart. And now this first time that they've been hitched to a cart that's not been used, take their calves home away from them. So what are they saying? Hook up 2 never yoked cows to the cart. Okay. Why the colt of a donkey? Well, Matthew tells us this in Matthew. He tells us this, but it comes not from Matthew directly or any of the Gospels directly. It comes directly out of Zechariah 9:9. Zechariah chapters 9 through 14 tell us more about end times activity than any other Old Testament book, including Daniel. Daniel has a lot of detail of a specific sort, but the best overall view of end times comes from Zechariah. So let me read Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. There is no question this is a picture of the triumphal entry. And Jesus is making sure that he fits this picture. He is going to act out, in some sense, Zechariah 9:9 as he goes down the path into Jerusalem. He's not making any qualms about his being the Messiah, the king to be on David's throne eternally. Well, humble, a proud king would normally come riding into town on what? A magnificent stallion, maybe even a magnificent white or solid black stallion. But when you come on something like a young colt from a donkey, that ain't much, folks. So that's a display of humility. It implied humility, and the unridden foal of a donkey even more emphatic that this was a holy endeavor. The last chapters of Zechariah, as I said, from chapter 9 to chapter 14, are considered the most complete prophecy of the end times. It's worth reading. It's worth reading from chapter 1 on for a number of reasons. And we have done Zechariah before. So if you're curious about it, you can go back there and see what I thought about Zechariah 3 years ago or so. Jesus told them how to deal with questions about their effort. I mean, there are people in town know these guys that don't belong here. They're coming in, they're untying this colt, so they're going to take him. So, check what happened in Mark 11, verses 4, 5, and 6. And they went away, the two, and found a colt tied at the door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of the bystanders were saying to them, "What are you doing, untying the colt?" They're essentially saying, "Are you swiping this guy?" And they spoke to them, the two spoke to the passers-by. Is that what they're called? Bystanders. They spoke to them just as Jesus told them to, and they, the bystanders, gave them permission. Now Luke will tell us, I think it's Luke, we'll check it a little bit later, will tell us that these bystanders included the owners. So they didn't get away with anything. The owners were present when they took it. Get the idea that Jesus knew what had happened, that he told them how to respond? And this many scholars believe, Jesus actually had set up this taking of the colt beforehand, and that the owners knew that he was going to call for it. So, again, let me read Luke 19:33. See who the bystanders were. And as the two were untying the colt, its owners said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" It was actually the owners who quizzed the two and gave permission for them to take the colt. So again, did Jesus set this up in advance? Certainly reasonable to assume that, I guess. But what's next? Well, let's go back to Mark 11, verses 7 and 8. And they brought the colt to Jesus. And remember, Matthew told us they brought Mama too. And they put their garments on it. He had no saddle. He'd never been ridden before. They put their garments on it, and he sat upon it. Apparently, I have some feeling this was more than the 12 who are now involved. Some of the pilgrims are involved in helping this to happen, but I'm not going to check that out or go into it in any way. And many, here we are, many, would many be more than 12, spread their garments in the road, and others spread leafy branches, and we know they were palm branches. which they had cut from the fields. I don't know whether owners would have approved of that or not, but they did it. So, that's so far for the preparation on the trail leading to Jerusalem. They had to get Jesus' donkey ride, colt, donkey ride. They had to get clothes spread on it. The clothes spread on the donkey and on the road would have been typical for a new king. He would, if he's going to ride a colt or donkey and go down the main road, people would have thrown their clothes in there to give him a clean path in. All that remains is for Jesus to kick the colt in the ribs, or however he does his giddy up, and join in the crowd going down to Jerusalem. Join in the crowd probably means there'll be some in front of him, there'll be some behind him. It's a crowd that apparently has been gathering since Jericho, and would have been continually adding to the mix as they went from Jericho to Bethany, now from Bethany to Bethphage, and now down the hill. Well, next time we're going down the hill.